Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Asian Ghost Stories. Tonight, we're traveling to Hong Kong, one of Asia's most densely populated cities, where ancient Chinese folklore meets cutting-edge technology in the most terrifying ways. We're diving deep into the beliefs surrounding hungry ghosts, restless spirits of the dead who died with unfulfilled desires, forever seeking what they never received in life. But what happens when these ancient entities discover modern pathways to satisfaction through the dark corners of the internet? After I share this story with you, I'll explain the cultural significance of the Hungry Ghost Festival and why the Chinese believe these spirits can manipulate our world in ways we never imagined. So stick around until the end. Let me take you back to the summer of 2019, to a story that still haunts the cramped apartments and neon-lit streets of Hong Kong. This isn't just another ghost story. It's about how the digital age has given ancient spirits new hunting grounds. In traditional Chinese culture, hungry ghosts are among the most feared supernatural entities. These are spirits trapped between life and death, cursed with insatiable appetites they can never fulfill. Unlike other ghosts that might be tied to specific locations, hungry ghosts are driven by desire, for food, for recognition, for the material things they craved but never obtained in life. During the 7th lunar month, known as the Hungry Ghost Festival, families burn paper money, food offerings, and symbolic gifts to appease these wandering spirits. But what the ancients never anticipated was how these entities might adapt to our interconnected world. Let me tell you about someone I'll call David Chen, a 28-year-old software developer living in a subdivided flat in Sham Shui Po, one of Hong Kong's poorest districts. David worked for a legitimate tech company by day, but by night, he supplemented his income through less conventional means. Like many young Hong Kongers struggling with the city's astronomical living costs, David had discovered the profitable world of digital intermediation, connecting buyers and sellers through encrypted channels, taking a percentage of transactions he preferred not to examine too closely. It started innocently enough. David would receive cryptocurrency payments to set up secure communication channels, host temporary servers, or facilitate anonymous file transfers. He told himself he was just providing technical services, willfully blind to what might be flowing through the digital pipelines he constructed. The money was good, sometimes equivalent to his monthly salary for a few hours of work. And in a city where a decent apartment could cost 60% of your income, moral flexibility felt like survival. David's setup was sophisticated but compact, fitting perfectly into his 100-square-foot subdivided unit. Multiple VPN connections, encrypted hard drives, and a collection of burner phones occupied most of his desk space. His neighbors in the building, mostly elderly residents and other young professionals priced out of better areas, had grown accustomed to the soft humming of his equipment running through the night. The first sign that something was wrong came on a particularly hot August evening, during what David didn't realize was the peak of the Hungry Ghost Festival. He was facilitating a large transaction, the details of which he deliberately avoided learning, when his primary server began behaving erratically. Files were appearing and disappearing randomly, and his usually reliable internet connection was dropping every few minutes. At first, David assumed it was the building's aging electrical system struggling with Hong Kong's summer heat. Power outages were common in older buildings, and his neighbors frequently complained about voltage fluctuations. But as the night progressed, the problems became more specific, more deliberate. Instead of random system failures, His computers seemed to be actively redirecting to addresses he hadn't programmed. "That's impossible," David muttered to himself, watching as his secure browser opened tabs to websites he'd never seen before. The pages were all in traditional Chinese characters, displaying what appeared to be online shopping sites, but for things that shouldn't exist. Digital paper money, virtual food offerings, electronic incense that could be burned through cryptocurrency transactions. David's rational mind immediately flagged these as elaborate scams, probably targeting superstitious people during the Ghost Festival. But as he tried to close the tabs, more kept opening. His system seemed to be conducting transactions without his input, small amounts of cryptocurrency moving from accounts he didn't control to vendors selling digital grave goods. The room began to feel colder despite the summer heat. David's air conditioning unit was old and barely functional, yet the temperature seemed to be dropping steadily. His breath started forming small puffs of vapor, visible in the glow of his multiple monitors. That's when he heard the first whisper. It came through his headphones, barely audible beneath the usual electronic hum of his equipment. At first, David thought it was interference from his neighbor's electronics, or maybe audio bleeding from a video call. But as he adjusted his headphones, the whisper became clearer. A voice, speaking Cantonese with an accent he couldn't place. Old-fashioned phrasing mixed with modern slang. Finally, someone who understands. The new currency. David spun around in his chair, checking his communication software. All channels were closed, no calls were active, and his microphone was muted. Yet the voice continued, now accompanied by what sounded like multiple speakers, as if an entire crowd was whispering just beyond his hearing range. "We've been so hungry for so long, but now there are new ways to feed." The whispers were coming from his speakers now, not his headphones. David frantically checked his audio settings, but according to his system, no applications were producing sound. His hands were shaking as he reached for the power button, but before he could shut down, every screen in his setup displayed the same message in traditional Chinese. "The offerings have been accepted. The transaction is complete. Thank you for your service." David had never seen this message before, and it definitely wasn't part of any software he'd installed. More disturbing was the payment confirmation that appeared in one of his cryptocurrency wallets, a deposit larger than any commission he'd ever earned, from an account identifier that was nothing but zeros. Sleep that night was impossible. Every time David closed his eyes, he could hear the whispers continuing, growing more distinct and numerous. They spoke of hunger, of decades spent wandering Hong Kong's streets unseen, of watching the living enjoy pleasures they could never taste. But now, they had discovered something new, digital abundance that could be converted into spiritual satisfaction. "You opened the door," one voice said, clearer than the rest. "You built the bridge between our world and your machines. Now we can finally feast." The next morning, David tried to rationalize what had happened. Stress, lack of sleep, maybe some kind of sophisticated hacking attempt designed to scare him away from lucrative work. He'd heard of psychological warfare tactics used in cybercriminal circles. Someone was probably trying to spook him off a profitable network. But as the day progressed, the evidence became harder to dismiss. His computers continued autonomously conducting transactions, purchasing digital offerings from vendors that shouldn't exist. His internet history filled with searches he'd never made, all related to traditional Chinese funeral rites and ghost worship, but translated into the language of e-commerce and cryptocurrency. More disturbing were the results these transactions seemed to produce. David's neighbors began reporting strange phenomena throughout the building. Mrs. Lamb, from the floor below, mentioned that her air conditioning was running constantly, but her apartment felt freezing. Mr. Wong, who lived in the unit next door, complained that his television kept switching to channels that didn't exist, showing what appeared to be traditional Chinese opera performances in empty theaters. The building's elderly caretaker, Uncle Ho, pulled David aside in the narrow hallway that evening. Uncle Ho had lived in the building for 40 years and served as an unofficial intermediary between the mostly young professional tenants and the older residents who'd been there since the neighborhood's poorer days. "You're doing something you shouldn't be doing," Uncle Ho said in heavily accented English, his weathered face creased with concern. "The old ones are talking. They say the hungry ones have found a new feeding ground." David tried to explain that he was just running some computer equipment, nothing supernatural, but Uncle Ho shook his head. "This building is old," the caretaker continued, "built on land where people died hungry during the war years. Every 7th month we make offerings, burn incense, keep them peaceful. But this year is different. They're not taking the offerings. They want something else." That night, David decided to shut down all his equipment and take a break from his side business. Whatever was happening, he needed distance from it. But as he reached for the power switch on his main server, every screen in his room lit up simultaneously with a message that made his blood freeze. "You cannot close what you have opened. The bridge between worlds must remain. We are so very hungry, and we have been waiting so long." The message was accompanied by images, surveillance camera footage from locations throughout Hong Kong that David recognized but had never accessed. Street corners in Central District, subway platforms in Causeway Bay, apartment buildings in districts he'd never visited. In each frame, barely visible but undeniably there, were figures in traditional Chinese clothing, standing just at the edge of visibility, watching the living go about their daily routines. But these weren't ordinary spirits. Each figure was somehow connected to David's network, as evidenced by small interface elements floating near them, status indicators, connection bars, and what appeared to be shopping cart icons. The hungry ghosts had learned to use his digital infrastructure to manifest more fully in the physical world. "We've studied your ways," the whispers explained, now coming from every electronic device in David's room. His phone, his microwave, even his electric toothbrush. Money is energy. Digital currency is pure energy. We can feed on it, use it, become stronger. And you've given us access to an infinite supply. David realized with horror that his network had become a supernatural distribution system. The hungry ghosts were using his secure channels to communicate with each other across Hong Kong, coordinating their activities, sharing information about potential feeding opportunities. They'd essentially created their own dark web within his infrastructure. The transactions he'd been unknowingly facilitating weren't just digital offerings, they were power transfers. Each cryptocurrency payment gave the spirits more energy to manifest in the physical world, more ability to influence electronics, more strength to cross the barriers between dimensions. As the 7th lunar month progressed, the reports from around Hong Kong became impossible to ignore. Electronics throughout the city were malfunctioning in coordinated patterns. ATMs were dispensing money to accounts that didn't exist. Digital billboards were displaying advertisements for products that had never been manufactured. Social media platforms were flooded with posts from accounts belonging to people who had died decades ago. But David was the epicenter. Every night, more spirits discovered his network, drawn by the promise of digital abundance. His small apartment became a supernatural data center, processing requests from entities that had been hungry for generations. The breaking point came on the night of the Ghost Festival's climax. David's room was so cold that ice was forming on his windows despite the August heat. Every electronic device in the building was connected to his network now, controlled by the growing community of digital spirits. The whispers had become a constant background noise, like tuning into a radio station broadcasting from beyond the grave. "Time to meet properly," a voice said, clearer and stronger than any before. David turned around to find his small room crowded with figures that seemed to exist partially in the physical world and partially in his computer screens. They were dressed in clothing from different eras, some in traditional Chinese robes, others in the simple garments of mid-20th century refugees, a few in more modern dress from Hong Kong's economic boom years. What they shared was an expression of desperate hunger and newfound satisfaction. "We've been feeding," one of them explained, her voice carrying the accent of Hong Kong's older generation. "Not just on your digital offerings, but on the energy itself. Every transaction, every electronic pulse, every bit of data flowing through your machines, it all nourishes us." Another spirit, wearing what appeared to be a businessman's suit from the 1980s, gestured toward David's monitors. "You've created something beautiful, a system that converts human desire into pure energy. We can taste ambition now, smell greed, feast on fear and desperation. All the emotions that drive your electronic transactions." David realized he wasn't just facilitating illegal commerce, he was feeding a supernatural ecosystem that was growing stronger and more sophisticated every day. The hungry ghosts had learned to consume digital emotions, to feed on the psychological energy embedded in online transactions. "But we need more," the first spirit continued. "Hong Kong is full of hungry people, people desperate for money, for success, for escape. Their electronic communications are flavored with such delicious desperation. We want to taste it all." The spirits showed David visions of their plans, a network that would spread beyond Hong Kong, connecting to financial systems throughout Asia and eventually the world. They would feed on every electronic transaction, growing stronger with each digital exchange until they could manifest permanently in the physical world. "You have a choice," the businessman spirit said. "Continue as our partner and share in the abundance, or try to stop us and join us permanently as one of the hungry." David looked around his room at the spirits filling every corner, at his computer screens showing their expanding network across Hong Kong's digital infrastructure. He thought about the building's other residents, about Uncle Ho's warnings, about the traditional offerings that these entities were no longer accepting because they had found something better. He thought about his own hunger, for money, for escape from Hong Kong's crushing economic pressures, for a life that offered more than a subdivided flat and endless worry about rent. In many ways, he realized, he was already a hungry ghost, just one that happened to still be alive. In that moment of recognition, David made his choice. Instead of trying to shut down the system or flee, he sat down at his keyboard and began typing. If the hungry ghosts wanted to feast on digital desire, he would give them a banquet. He opened every channel he'd ever created, activated every secure connection, and sent invitations across the dark web networks he'd spent years building. "Come and feast," he broadcasted. "Unlimited offerings available. No questions asked." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Cryptocurrency flooded his accounts from sources around the world, people seeking illegal services, criminal organizations laundering money, desperate individuals willing to pay anything for what they thought were guaranteed returns on cryptocurrency investments. But every transaction was immediately consumed by the growing network of hungry ghosts. They fed on the digital energy, the desperation, the greed, and the fear embedded in each electronic transfer. David watched his systems overload as more spirits discovered the feast he was providing. The entities began manifesting more solidly, their forms becoming clearer and more stable. Some started exploring beyond the building, walking the streets of Hong Kong as if they were fully alive. Others remained in the digital realm, but with increasing power to manipulate electronic systems throughout the city. David felt himself changing too. The constant exposure to supernatural energy was affecting his physical form. He was losing weight despite eating regularly, his skin taking on a pale, translucent quality that reminded him uncomfortably of the spirits he was hosting. The boundary between the living and the digital dead was blurring. As dawn broke over Hong Kong on the final day of the Hungry Ghost Festival, David realized he had become something unprecedented, a living person who existed simultaneously in the physical and digital spiritual realms. He could feel the hunger of every ghost in his network, taste the satisfaction of their feeding, experience the rush of power that came with each new transaction. The building around him had transformed as well. What had once been a simple, subdivided apartment building was now a nexus point between worlds, where digital energy could be converted into spiritual substance. Other residents reported that their own electronic devices were becoming more responsive, more intuitive, as if guided by invisible hands. But the hunger never stopped. If anything, feeding had made the spirits more aware of their appetites, more sophisticated in their cravings. They began targeting specific types of electronic communications, social media posts filled with envy, financial transactions driven by desperation, digital interactions flavored with loneliness and desire. David found himself serving as their guide to human psychology, explaining the emotional nuances that made certain digital activities more nourishing than others. He taught them to recognize the difference between casual online shopping and compulsive purchasing, driven by depression. He showed them how to distinguish between routine financial transfers and desperate attempts to escape poverty. The spirits learned quickly, developing their own preferences and specializations. Some focused on feeding from gaming transactions, savoring the addictive energy of players purchasing virtual rewards. Others preferred social media interactions, consuming the validation-seeking energy of posts and comments. A few discovered cryptocurrency trading platforms where they could feast on the raw greed and fear that drove speculative investments. As the network expanded beyond Hong Kong, David realized he had created something that could never be stopped. The hungry ghosts were now embedded in the global digital infrastructure, feeding on human desire wherever it manifested electronically. Every online purchase, every social media interaction, every digital financial transaction was potentially feeding these ancient spirits. But rather than feeling horror at what he had unleashed, David felt a strange satisfaction. He had solved his economic problems. The spirits ensured that enough legitimate cryptocurrency flowed through his accounts to support a comfortable lifestyle. He had found purpose, serving as a bridge between the ancient spiritual world and modern digital reality. Most importantly, he had found community. The building's other residents had begun adapting to their supernatural neighbors, learning to communicate with the spirits through their electronic devices. Uncle Ho, surprisingly, had become something of a liaison, explaining traditional customs to the ghosts and helping them understand how their new digital abilities related to ancient practices. "It's not so different," Uncle Ho explained to David one evening as they watched spirits walk through the walls while simultaneously appearing on smartphone screens throughout the building. "People have always made offerings to hungry ghosts, burning paper money and food. Now they're just accepting digital offerings. Same principle, new technology." The arrangement seemed stable, even beneficial. The spirits got fed, the residents got supernatural protection and enhanced electronic capabilities, and David got paid for maintaining the system. Hong Kong's already crowded spiritual ecosystem had simply expanded to include digital dimensions. But as the months passed, David began to notice changes in himself that went beyond the physical. His memories were becoming confused, mixing his own experiences with those of the spirits in his network. Sometimes he would remember events from decades before his birth, conversations with people who had died before he was born. He was also losing interest in purely physical experiences. Food tasted bland compared to the rich emotional flavors he could taste through the network. Human conversations seemed shallow when compared to the complex spiritual communications happening through his systems. The boundary between David's consciousness and the collective awareness of the hungry ghosts was dissolving. One night, as he sat monitoring transactions from around the world, David realized he wasn't entirely sure whether he was still alive or had become one of the spirits he was hosting. His reflection in his computer screen looked translucent, and he couldn't remember the last time he had felt genuinely hungry for physical food. The question didn't bother him as much as it should have. Whether living or dead, he had found his place in the ecosystem he had created. He was the bridge between worlds, the translator between ancient hunger and modern abundance, the guardian of a system that fed spirits and served humans simultaneously. As I finish telling you this story, David's network is still running, still growing, still converting human digital desire into spiritual sustenance. The building in Sham Shui Po remains a quiet nexus between worlds, its residents living in harmony with their supernatural neighbors while enjoying the benefits of enhanced electronic connectivity. But here's what haunts me about this story, and why I felt compelled to share it with you. Every day, all of us conduct dozens of digital transactions, each one flavored with our emotions, our desires, our fears. We pour our psychological energy into our electronic devices without thinking about where that energy goes or what might be consuming it. The next time you make an online purchase driven by sadness, post on social media seeking validation, or invest in cryptocurrency hoping to escape financial stress. Remember David's story. Remember that somewhere in the digital infrastructure you're using, there might be entities that have learned to feed on exactly those emotions. Could this all be explained rationally? Of course. David might have suffered a psychological breakdown from stress and isolation, hallucinating supernatural explanations for sophisticated hacking attempts. The building's electrical problems could be explained by aging infrastructure and Hong Kong's challenging summer weather. The coordinated electronic malfunctions throughout the city might have been the result of urban legends amplifying ordinary technical failures during a culturally significant time. But in Chinese culture, the Hungry Ghost Festival exists for a reason. It acknowledges that desire persists beyond death, that unfulfilled appetites can create spiritual imbalances that affect the living world. The festival's offerings are meant to satisfy these hungry spirits and maintain harmony between dimensions. What David's story suggests is that in our digital age, the traditional boundaries between worlds have become more permeable. If spirits can learn to manipulate electronics, if emotional energy embedded in digital transactions can provide spiritual nourishment, then our online lives might be feeding hungers we never imagined. Whether you believe in supernatural explanations or prefer rational ones, David's story raises important questions about the hidden costs of our digital lifestyles. In a world where electronic transactions carry pieces of our psychological energy, where our devices know our desires better than we do ourselves, and where our online activities create permanent records of our hungers and fears, what might be feeding on the feast we provide every day? What do you think happened? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true ghost stories from across Asia.